discussion. My name is Rick Crawford, and over the past 9 years, I've been in the field of sustainability, starting with earning an MBA in sustainable business, to installing solar panels, to working in biodiesel manufacturing, and also working with commercial building product manufacturers on how to market sustainability. That was all rewarding work, but ultimately I decided to marry my passion for fly fishing and sustainability and launched my company, Emerger Strategies. We work with brands like Flood Tide Company, RepYourWater, Abaco Lodge, and we work with them to increase their growth while minimizing their environmental impact. And the way that we do that is by turning their sustainability achievements into powerful marketing stories. So in the process of wanting to protect what I love, I've discovered that there's really three main threats to our fisheries, and that's population, policy, and pollution, or what I like to call the 3 Ps. Population, as it relates to things like overfishing, and also with a growing population, we're increasing our demand for finite resources. Policy level, things like what's happening here in the state of Florida, with discharges from Lake Okeechobee, to public lands policy, to what's happening with the revision of Magnuson-Stevens. And on a pollution level, and how it negatively impacts our fisheries. Plastic is obvious. Thanks for bringing those reusable cups and glasses, guys. But also the greatest threat to our fisheries is climate change and pollution in the form of greenhouse gas emissions. So when we burn fossil fuels, they emit greenhouse gas emissions, which warms our planet. So before we get started, one thing that I do want to set the stage for this panel discussion is that this is not a debate of whether climate change is real or not. It's happening right now, and it's already negatively impacting our fisheries. How do I know that climate change is happening? Well, according to the 97% of climate scientists who regularly publish in peer-reviewed journals, who agree that burning fossil fuels emits greenhouse gas emissions, which is warming our planet. So, if y'all haven't picked up from the accent, I'm from the South, and so I hear quite a bit of some backlash when I talk about climate change. So I thought it might be a good idea to make that a little bit more relatable. And so let's play this scenario out. You've been diagnosed with a cancer, and you go to see 100 doctors, and 97 of them tell you that if you get chemo, change your diet, and exercise, you have a good chance of extending your life a number of years. But if you don't, you'll die in the next 6 months. But then there's 3 of them who say, keep on your current course, you're probably good. Who are you going to listen to in that scenario? So it's really just common sense. These are climate scientists who, this is what they do for a living, they studied it, and they agree burning fossil fuels is causing climate change. So one of the goals of this panel is to educate and create more awareness about climate change. So I thought I'd run through just a few quick facts on climate change before we dive into the panel. Sea levels have risen 8 inches over the last century, and what's most shocking is that that's nearly doubled in the last 2 decades. So when sea level rises, it can impact our inshore nurseries for fish, could also infiltrate our fresh groundwater. There's been a 30% increase in ocean acidity, and ocean acidification makes it more difficult for shelled animals like oysters, as well as crustaceans like shrimp and crabs, to build their shells and survive, and that has ripple effects throughout the ecosystem. There's been 16 record-breaking hottest years since 2000, 2016 being the hottest. So I live in the low country of South Carolina, and higher land and water temperatures combined with more frequent droughts are already causing our marshes to disappear. This also has a ripple effect throughout our fisheries and ecosystems. The average worldwide temperature has increased 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the last century. So warmer river temperatures put stress on cold water species like trout. And as of last week, we're at 411 parts per million is the average concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. When you compare that to pre-industrial revolution, over the last 400,000 years, it was at 275 parts per million. So this results in less snowpack, more wildfires, more frequent droughts, all of which making it more difficult for cold water species to survive. So our objective here today is to really not only educate and create awareness about climate change, but also learn how some businesses are turning that into a business opportunity. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel here. Over here on the far side, we've got Dr. Aaron Adams, who is the Director of Science and Conservation with Bonefish Tarpon Trust. He's also a senior scientist with Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute at Florida Atlantic University, and has lived and worked on both U.S. coasts throughout the Caribbean, and has been conducting fish research for the last 25 years. Garrison Doctor here, this good-looking Everglades hat, is with RepYourWater, is co-founder of RepYourWater with his wife Corinne, and they've created an apparel brand dedicated to providing uniquely designed, top-quality gear for hunters and anglers, while increasing support of local conservation and inspiring exploration. RepYourWater in 2017 has donated over $54,000 to their conservation partners, and is currently working on their 2020 sustainability goals of achieving zero greenhouse gas emissions, as well as zero waste from their headquarters. Hilary Hutcheson is the guide of Lary. I'm wondering about that.
Larry's is short for Hilary, super creepy.
Okay, gotcha. And they're located just outside of Glacier National Park. Hilary is an ambassador for such brands as Fishpond and Yeti, as well as such nonprofits as Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and Protect Our Winters. Hilary has exemplified her beliefs by traveling to Washington, D.C. to speak with our elected officials about the impact climate change is having on our outdoor recreation economy. John Lamb-LeCoq is the CEO of Fishpond, and they're making apparel for products designed for anglers and those who live an outdoor adventure travel lifestyle. Fishpond is a certified B Corp. They give back to environmental nonprofits, and they are currently making products out of commercial recycled fishing nets with their product line, Pond. Additionally, Fishpond is an activist company speaking for public lands, and John has traveled to D.C. to meet with politicians to advocate for better climate change policy. So, with that, we're going to dive into the panel discussion. And John, Hilary, I'd like to kick things off with you and ask, why is addressing climate change important to you?
Well, I personally feel that we've been looking at it. Certainly where I live, I live at the crown of the continent, as they call it, which is Glacier National Park. And, the word is right in the name, it's glacier. So I've been seeing it in the last 25 years. I started guiding 25 years ago, and since then have seen the predictions that were made happen before my eyes. So in all of that time of seeing it, I've been trying to address it the best that I could and not really knowing how. So learning, asking questions, being surrounded by people like yourself who know, and certainly talking to as many experts and scientists as possible has been the beginning of how I personally addressed it. But I think now, as anglers, we're kind of past the point of just asking questions and into an action mode. At least that's what I'm seeing from anglers, guys I go with. And no more kind of just talking about what we see, but now actually doing something about it. And that's been really encouraging for me in the last, certainly last 5 years, I think, is seeing fishermen move from just talking about the woe is me and gloom and doom and pushing into action.
Yeah, which I think is important too. I mean, that, all doom and gloom, people get all down about it, but there's really a lot of positive things happening as a result.
Yeah. Well, we've spent a lot of time, people asking, gosh, what's happening on the glacier in Montana? And as a Montana fishing guide, seeing it every day, people ask, and so you're able to say, but then there's this kind of awkward silence after, which is like, well, that sucks, and that's kind of their reaction. And so the addressing part, I'm glad you asked, is then it was like, well, I got to get rid of that awkward silence and talk about what to do about it and talk about what next. And in that amount of time, there's just kind of something new every day. Like right now, we've just proposed 2 stonefly species to the U.S. Endangered Species Act to the list, which is a big deal because that's top of the food chain stuff. Like that's like for these fish, for native westlet cutthroat. We live in the most biodiverse ecosystem in the lower 48 states that's fully at risk, and these 2 stoneflies, meltwater stonefly and the western glacier stonefly, could be, key to that kind of demise. And so holding those keys and being places like this and talking to people who can also create that ripple effect and move forward and talk more and ultimately, kind of reverse some policy. And so that's where, for me, that's where the action goes, is toward the policy and having that political will and speaking with our elected leadership.
Agreed. And so, Aaron, I'm curious to know, you've been studying this for 25 years. When did you first become aware of the impacts of climate change on our fisheries?
Well, I guess I could look in hindsight, and more than 25 years ago. I started my fish research in the Caribbean, and at that point they'd already had significant diseases and die-offs that in hindsight probably associated with climate change. Massive coral diseases and die-offs, some other issues, changes in bait fish distributions that weren't associated with harvest. And we're seeing all those play out now in other locations. So in hindsight, I guess my entire career has kind of been touched by climate change. What's been most frustrating and disturbing is that our resource management policies and even social policies are still in a 1950s mindset, whereas the universe that we're working in now is obviously much farther along than that. And the rate of change is increasing, which makes us still in that 1950s mindset even more of a problem every day. I grew up in Chesapeake Bay, and as I grew up, the bay was crashing ecologically, and a lot of that was due to pollution. But a lot of that, in hindsight again, was also due to climate change. The introduction of new diseases that wouldn't have a foothold prior, new species moving northward that hadn't been there before, more variable weather that affected the bay's ecosystems, especially waterfowl, pretty tremendously. And although Chesapeake Bay has improved, because they've addressed a lot of the anthropogenic inputs nearby, pollution and runoff, there's still, climate change is pretty much the third rail. And it's not just directly dealing with our fisheries or resources like stoneflies. Those are, what we're seeing with our fisheries are the symptoms of a disease. And the disease, even climate change, is a symptom of a larger disease. So, kind of circling back to Florida, it's not just sea level rise, it's also water management policies that are, again, going back to the 1950s, so that there's more saltwater intrusion into inland areas. It's affecting the nursery habitats for species like tarpon and snook, which use the mangroves. The way Florida allows land development, you can build up to but not into red mangroves, which means that sea level rises, there's no place for those mangroves or salt marshes for that matter to retreat. South Carolina, looking at the state's development plan, looking out 50 years, they're going to do the same thing. So sea level rises where you are, all those redfish and trout nurseries, they're going to get squeezed. So, I mean, I guess that's one of the advantages of having been in this for a while, is seeing those collective changes, and having been at the point for at least half of that time with colleagues where we knew what was going on, we could predict it, and have been talking about it. But the changes have been extremely slow, so it's frustrating. Especially to hear someone like Hilary seeing this in her guideline. That tells you that it's changing extremely fast. And the other thing I can say before I'll shut up is this isn't something that you see a gradual change over time. This happens and then there's a cliff that drops off. And then it happens and there's a cliff that drops off. There's none of this long-term or all. You can see it. It happens in pretty dramatic fashion. Cliff fall. And I think everybody here can probably think of an example of that happening. Bonefish in the Florida Keys, striped bass in the Atlantic. We go on and on about those types of cliff falls. And you get to a certain point, excuse me, where you do get to a point of no recovery. And I don't want to be too much of a downer because we do need to get people energized. But I think people do have to realize that those are the consequences. And there's places in Florida now, and part of it, again, it's a mix. It's climate change, it's water mismanagement, et cetera. But there are places in Florida now that are pretty close to that edge. And as climate changes, those places become less resilient and less able to recover, which makes it even more important to sound the alarm.
And Garrison, actually, I know that we had talked about y'all did a trip down to Patagonia, and I know that, can you elaborate a little bit more? I know y'all had seen some pretty alarming things down on your trip regarding y'all doing some birding and glacial stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hilary obviously spoke to this already and can speak more to it, but down there in southern Patagonia, I think anywhere in the world where there's glaciers right now, it's very dramatic to visually see this is what's happening. It's so clear. But some of the, it's kind of an interesting place down there, obviously, because salmonids aren't native, but fantastic trout fishing. But some of these places where trout live now, they're drying up, and we were fishing lakes that, the river doesn't flow out of the lake, and it's dropping 18 inches a year because there just isn't the precipitation that they used to get anymore. They're going away. And the glaciers are going away. So, I think there's certain places where it's extremely dramatic to see those visual changes in action. But Johnny and I were talking, we're in Colorado, and we see it every year. Higher temps, river closures. It's more and more.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next follow-up, because I know y'all are both in Colorado, so what are you actually visibly able to see? Because that's one thing I think with climate change that people don't get. They think it's this some like abstract thing, and greenhouse gas emissions are a form of pollution, but you can't see it. But now we're seeing the impacts of it. So I'm curious to know, what are y'all seeing in Colorado?
Well, from my perspective, to reiterate what Aaron had mentioned, people start to wake up when you start to see it in your own backyard. Florida, we went to Washington with Hilary. We went with a group called Protect Our Winters. We had Olympic athletes with us, and we were at a congressional panel in Senate offices where most of the representatives were from Florida, and they were waking up. They were concerned. They were there. They were attending because hurricane, I can't remember the hurricane. So anyhow, so they are concerned. Their constituents are concerned, so they're reacting, and they're going to be concerned about it. They want to move that up to policy perspective. But what we see in our own backyard, all of a sudden when it becomes real, you start to take change. But we can't wait for that to happen. In other words, we can't just wait to actually have it physically impact us, economically impact us before we take a lead on this. So I think as an industry, how we protect our resources, how do we protect what we love, I think we need to step up to the plate as an industry, people who love our resources, people who love our water, people who love our country, I think our public lands and our water and our habitat, the species that we have on the 646 million acres of public land is part of the identity of America. And I think that it's critical that we see that as far as the lifeblood, as far as who we are, not just for ourselves, but for the species that live here as well. In Colorado, to be more specific to your question, what we see happening around us is different from Florida, but even at the high country, I live at 8,200 feet in the high country of Colorado on the western slope. We had a very low snowpack this year, and my ponds, I have a series of ponds on the ranch where I live, and this year, and I've marked down when the species of birds show up, when the ice melts. I mean, for 27 years I lived on this ranch. This year, my ponds melted 1 month earlier than the last 27 years, which have always been almost within days of each other. So just one example, and I'm seeing it from the species migration perspective, how species are coming at different times and leaving at different times. So I'm personally am aware of it. But I'm with people like Hilary and Aaron that we have interacted with before on live panels and discussions. It's time for us all to step up to the plate. I'm really appreciative of you putting a panel like this together because we need to discuss these issues, and we need to discuss it as industry because policy will change, especially when there's economics behind it. So as the business of sport fishing and fisheries, people who love to be out in boats and catching fish, etc., when we start to speak up, people will listen in Washington because it impacts us financially, economically. I think that's the best way to kind of get the ball moving. I can keep going here, but I'll stop.
Yeah.
But I think we're seeing these changes around us, and we need to react to this quickly.
Yeah.
But I'll pass on.
Well, I appreciate it. I couldn't agree more. And so I'm also, to get a little bit more specific, you just mentioned stone flies in Montana. Is there anything else that you're visibly able to see their impact?
Sure. So the most visual thing I think for my anglers on the trip is the fish, right? Because that ultimately they came to go fishing and they get this bonus of all this beautiful area, but they're catching a fish. And the pictures that they may have seen in magazines from a long time ago, since this has been a bucket list trip for them, have been your native West Slope, black spotted cutthroat trout. And that's the beautiful green body and the big spots going all the way down, and then obviously that really prolific orange cut under the jaw. Well, now it's a damn rainbow. and that might not sound so bad, but when you made it your destination to come and catch this native species that is really the only place where you can get this fully intact ecosystem with this fish that's been the same fish for the beginning of history, and now suddenly we have this giant threat of hybridization with rainbows that's enhanced by climate change. It's not what you signed up for. It's not what you came for. So literally the fish that are cutthroats now that are moving up through the system, the hybridization of rainbow trout and cutthroat are the #1 threat to the biodiversity in the ecosystem that is fully intact, the only one in the lower 48 states. So that is huge because that's what people came here for. People want to go fishing for big brown trout in other parts of Montana and rainbow in other parts of Montana, but when they come to Glacier, they want to come see kind of this really special fishery. And I mean, that's the main thing in the fishery. And literally that is, that's not just at risk, but it's happening now. The fish we're catching are hybrid. And it's really heartbreaking because when I first started guiding 25 years ago, it was really a different fish. It was a big native West Slope cutthroat, and now it's a cutboat. So we've still got them intact, but we're seeing the hybridization moving up from the lower part of the system. So we're just right at that point. Just like you said, that tipping point, that cusp. And I've seen the river change. I've seen obviously the glaciers are leaving, but the actual fish. When it comes to that, that's when it's really like, whoa, this is a different fish in the net right now.
Yeah, and Aaron, I guess to add on to that, I mean, what about flat species specifically, bonefish, tarpon,
Oh, sure. Just in my own fishing experience. So in 2000, the tarpon season in Charlotte Harbor, which is the Boca Grande Pass area, really started May 15th. You could work hard and find occasional fish prior, but mid-May is pretty much it. Now, reliably, April 1st. All right, so in 15, 16 years or so, 18 years, there's been a 6-week movement when those tarpon first migrate in. They're seeing the same, similar types of changes in the seasonality in the Florida Keys and Florida Bay. So that's just right there. We're working, Andy Danilchuk, who's in the audience, is leading a tarpon acoustic tracking project. And we're working a lot with guides and anglers up in Georgia and South Carolina. 15, 20 years ago, there may have been 1 or 2 guides who would target tarpon. Now, but there's dozens easily. Their season used to be mostly in the late summer, fall, August, September, with Menhaden and mullet migrating south. They're getting June 1st now. They're actually being able to book trips to Georgia starting June 1st. Some of our colleagues have done work on the physiology of bonefish. And in the summers now, in a lot of places, the backcountry creeks of bonefish, we love to wade those kind of mangrove creek kind of thing. Even now they're starting to get so hot that they're right at the maximum for bonefish. So as temperatures continue to increase, those summer months are going to be even more stressful. It means less habitat for bonefish to move into, to escape sharks, those types of things. So yeah, we're seeing those types of changes both from a scientific perspective, but also from a fishing perspective already. Tarpon, you look at the old records, they say, sure, they would occasionally see them up north. We're getting reports from New Jersey every year now, tarpon. Not a lot, but in fact, there. We had some commercial net fishermen send us some bonefish from Long Island, New York, and they weren't small. I mean, these guys were 22 inches. We're not sure which species, but they hadn't seen those types of things before. So those changes in the ocean world are happening. And another example is not flats, but I think is pretty telling. Black sea bass, which is a reef species, had been mid-Atlantic as late as mid-90s. That was it. Now it's so abundant off New England, people can't not catch them. And they don't even have regulations yet in New England for the lizards, but they're kind of pushing out other species. So when you see those types of dramatic geographical shifts in how fish are distributed, that's worrisome. But we also realize tarpon have been around for 50 million years, so they've gone through geographical shifts before. Even more worrisome than tarpon then is bonefish, because they have small homes. So if the flats they live on become too hot for 6 months out of the year, then they're in serious trouble as far as their long-term survival. And there's a lot of issues with the bonefish population decline in the Keys. One of them that is coming up repeatedly is climate change. And how that's affected water temperatures, but also currents, ocean currents that deliver larvae. So yeah, we can see it. The question is, how do we address it from a policy and PR perspective?
Right. I think that's obviously the big part of it is to make bigger change possible. It needs to be addressed at a policy level. But it's also things that we as individuals, but especially as companies and even more so as an industry, I think could have a massive impact. Is, what if fly fishing was the first industry to go zero greenhouse gas emissions for purchased electricity? Why not grow the sport by doing some good along the way? So that could be a possibility. I do want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more optimistically about
Before I move on from that, since you said policy, I'll go back to my original statement. We know that if we stop all CO2 emissions now, right, we've already set the ball rolling. So there's already going to be more drastic changes than we've seen now for things stabilize. That means that even as we go towards trying to say zero greenhouse emissions from the industry also has to push for policy changes that give the fishery the resilience to last through what's coming. So I'll go back to the wetlands, right? If our national policy continues to be that you can build up to the current wetland, then there's no place for those wetlands to go at sea level rise. If we continue to not address issues like with water temperatures in the rivers and the streams and allow geographic changes in how trout are distributed, salmon, then they're not going to make it through this next decade. So I think there has to be, it can't just be about greenhouse gases, it has to be about changing policy to give our systems a resilience to get through that.
I totally, absolutely 100% agree because humans and animals can adapt to climate change. We've already seen that. A glacier can't adapt. It doesn't have the ability to adapt. It just goes. And so when your water is fed by glacier and by groundwater, and so we already know it's going to be gone, then we already need to plan ahead for what happens to those fish once all this water is gone, because it's nearly gone. So that would mean new policy for bull trout, protected species like native cutthroat. And those are things that we're not seeing in the planning process yet.
Yeah, and it's, thinking ahead, thinking generations ahead is something that is required going forward on the policy level.
You're absolutely right. You can't, it's going to get worse before it gets better, for sure.
Well, Garrison, I know that RepYourWater has been working to minimize its environmental impact of its operations. If there's any other companies that are out in the audience today, what's some advice you might have for a company that's looking to start tackling climate change and maybe implement a sustainable business model?
Well, I think it's just trying to pick off what you can do. I think it's one thing that, is an impediment to all of us as individuals and companies is, it's an intimidating process, intimidating subject to tackle. So pick off some things that you can do. You can offset greenhouse gas emissions from your headquarters, which we're working hard to do. I wrote down some notes. Tracking, I think, is really important, like looking at the life cycle footprint of your product and of your warehouse and knowing kind of what that is a little bit and then being able to address pieces of that, I think, is really important. We're working really hard to reduce all of our waste, reduce waste to landfill. And that's something that I think has actually been pretty easy for us to achieve out of our main factory, main warehouse, headquarters. That's been pretty doable. And we get really great feedback from our customer base on any pieces that we do and have been able to tackle, even if they're relatively small. They're pieces that we can hopefully build on and continue to build on. To Aaron's point and Hilary's point, we work a lot with conservation partners like Bonefish and Tarpon Trust, like Trout Unlimited. And, I think that's really important from a policy perspective, but also in terms of refuges. In Colorado, TU works a lot on habitat. If we don't work on habitat and places where trout can take refuge in higher water temperature situations, that's where small things really make a difference. So I think putting some money to the science and to the policy to get out in front of people as a company is important. I also just think using our platforms to educate. Our customer base is primarily late 20s to very early 30s. That demographic historically hasn't been super involved in the nonprofit environmental community. That it's mainly been a little bit older historically. So I think for us, it's really important to tell that story to our customer base and try to really grow some involvement and awareness with that that demographic and that generation. And that's something that doesn't take doesn't take a lot of effort as a company for us to take a stand and try to educate and try to promote some awareness on these things. That it's not taking resources from our product line. think that's something that, people can do, and that as an industry, we should do more.
Yeah.
And that, Johnny has been, a leader on and working hard on as well.
Yeah, and I was going to follow up with John too, and they're a B Corp, they're a benefit corporation, and they give back, they meet a rigorous environmental standard. Would advise, similar question, but if someone is thinking about, hey, I think a lot of companies are scared to talk about climate change because they don't want to alienate some of their customer base, and frankly, we just don't have time. So I also think there's a lot of people who will remain loyal to a brand because of that. When a business takes a stand and they stand for something and that aligns with your own values, you will remain loyal to them. So, John, could you speak to being a B Corp and what some maybe practical advice you would give to a company who's making those first steps to say, hey, we're actually going to start talking about climate change, we're going to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, I think Fishpond has adopted some principles of environmental advocacy through our recycled materials. Starting 10 years ago, we moved all of our fabrics over to recycled fishing net, industrial waste. So we continue to do that, but I knew that was just a start. And, obviously we've built a strong customer base who believes in that, but I think a lot of people still don't really have a clue maybe that we can do that. But I think we continue to work towards learning how to be better leaders as business, taking a stand and becoming a B Corp is part of that. It's led me in a lot of different ways. For example, last year I went to Telluride, Colorado. I joined what we call through the outdoor industry called the CEO Climate Pledge. It was a summit. It was leaders from all sorts of industry, with Patagonia, with Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, with Apple Computer, Microsoft. And it was CEOs from companies who basically there to learn how to lead the charge from their base, their employees, to become better communicators on the topic of climate change. And admittedly, I didn't know a whole lot about climate change. In other words, we all live on the periphery of it, we see it, we feel it. But how do you communicate about climate change? What is climate change to a lot of people? And it's very scary. And I think what I've learned over the process is that it's better to talk about, and not the politics of climate change, but the impact of climate change. We all feel the impact. When you start bringing up the political nature of climate change, it becomes very divided. And people start taking sides and they start debating, etc. But I think we need to focus on the impacts and communicating that clearly to our businesses. Ben & Jerry's ice cream that was there made a very poignant comment when he said that they, as a business, they actually make money when they piss people off. In other words, when they bring up controversial subjects, when they communicate about them, when they spark that debate, there's a strong part of the population that says, you know what, thank you for doing that, we're going to support you. And they know that when they piss people off, there's going to be a certain number of people who aren't going to buy their product. But we can't be afraid of that. And I think as industry and business leaders in this country, this industry specifically has a huge amount of power. We have to protect not only our economy, but we have to protect the species that don't have a voice. And like Hilary's talking about, and Aaron and Garrison, that there's a resource out there that we have to protect for a whole lot more reasons than our businesses or our own personal self-interest. There's species out there that are begging for us to be clear and decisive as far as how we make decisions and communicate about this in the future. So B Corp is just one level. We're taking a stand. We work with Fish and Wildlife Service, with Ryan over here, with Beyond the Pond, National Fish Habitat Partnerships. There's a big voice out there that collectively we can actually talk about this issue, communicate about it, and teach people how to communicate about it. Collectively, we're going to start to drive towards that place where we can make a shift, which is important.
Yeah. And what would y'all say from a business perspective? Hilary, the fly shop, Garrison apparel brand, John, you're designing products, like bags and things. What are some of the greatest benefits, or what have been the greatest benefits to your business from adopting the sustainable business model? Have you seen an increase in sales or customer loyalty or brand awareness and any of those types of things?
I'll speak on behalf of guiding. Customer service is obviously the number one thing, and something that has been a pleasant benefit to running sustainable guiding business and fly shop is that our clients feel taken care of. I mean, we don't have plastic water bottles rolling through the boat. It doesn't look tacky. Suddenly you see that and it looks cheap, and they don't feel like they're getting a top shelf experience. But really, when you've taken a little bit more time to explain kind of where they are and where they're fishing and what it means to be doing this special thing that we're all doing together, because let's be real, this is ridiculous what we're doing. We're trying to fool a pea-brain pesca with these little pieces of fluff that we spent all winter trying to make look real. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? But it's so much more than that. It's this big, powerful thing, and when you reel it in and they all are there with you together and you have this captive audience, it's a special time. And whether it's in the shop or whether it's in the boat, they feel like kind of sharing this environment together and this good time. I mean, it's lots of high fives and good times, right? And when that's all shared together and you've made that experience just all part of this whole environmental sharing, I think is something that they can take home with them and they feel that they've been taken care of. So it's just this high-level customer service. Really, when you think about that, it's like caring about it, caring about your business. When they see the passion you put into it, it goes to them. It's for them. You know, it's not just for your children's children, it's for theirs. Because we want them to come back too. And so they see that that's how I'm putting food on the plate, you know, at the table to feed my kids. They're a part of that. You know, they're kind of a part of my life and I'm a part of theirs. So I feel like just running a sustainable business is a way of sharing together and kind of all being part of this global experience.
And I can speak for us and say, you know, we have seen absolutely increase in customer loyalty. I think part of that is due to, you know, the sustainability kind of goals and what we're trying to do and voice there and some stands that we've made. You know, I really enjoy conversations with people that call in. You know, we have a lot of regional themed gear and we donate back regionally to conservation partners off of that. So it puts us in touch with different fishing communities all across the country. And, you know, for example, I had a guy call in and he's on the West Coast and he really liked one of our steelhead designs, but he didn't want to support the Wild Steelhead Coalition. And all of our West Coast gear, you know, portion goes back to Wild Steelhead Coalition. So that was actually a really fun conversation for me because he didn't necessarily agree. I mean, he wants to put hatchery fish in his cooler and that's his thing. But to have those conversations with people like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Right? I think those are really important conversations to have too. But we do see just overwhelming positive feedback and increase in customer loyalty when we do put out anything that you know, makes a little bit of a stand, like Johnny was saying.
And I think there's the other aspect, besides our consumers, is that when we have this passion, like Hilary just exuded in Garrison, that when we have this passion to care for something, it puts us all into this kind of little tribe that we're all together. And I think even this little movement right here today, because we care so much, you know, with our businesses, look where it's leading us today. I mean, everybody in this room cares for one reason or another, right? So how do you mobilize these troops and this tribe that we have? And I think that's the exciting part. And I think it's beyond, I think even, you know, I think it's fun to engage with our consumers. You care. We have a great platform to communicate a lot of different issues. But I love the fact that this as an industry, that we putting this all together, that we're coalescing, we're actually finding ways, you know, and Connie Parker, Pure Fishing, I mean, we're looking at ways on plastics right now, and it's kind of funny, we're sitting right here, and there's this plastic water bottle right here, you know, and industries, and we see it all the time, and that, you know, there's shifts that we need to make that are around us all the time that are just habitual. Yeah. And I think, you know, and how we actually communicate and get our consumers to learn how to shift these habits, you know, we're going to get to a better place. You know, because frankly, climate change is about carbon. And I sit on the board of directors now of the Woods Hole Research Institute, which is considered the world's #1 climate change think tank in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And I'm learning a lot about the science behind climate change. And, you know, when I work with scientists like Aaron, you know, it's like it's impactful, it's important, and it's real. But yet scientists aren't the best communicators in the world. So how do I bridge?
That's why you put me and Johnny on opposite ends.
But not from that perspective of communication, but you know, as far as how to package the climate change story. So what I feel like I can be a participant, not being a scientist with Woods Hole, is being a participant and taking my friends and my compadres to be able to come in to work together to find the solutions and be those communicators. And so with Hilary on the water with people every day, with other brands that she represents, Garrison with RepYourWater. I mean, we're making an impact. But I think we have these friends that we all are a part of, that we realize that it's going to take us a team to get this done. It's not an individual brand. It's not individual people. It's really a team of people who give a damn. And I think that, the more we have this passion, the more we start, being evangelical, participants in this whole process that we're talking about with everybody we know, we're going to get to people who are going to make a change from a policy perspective. And I think that's what we all have to drive our efforts towards, as far as making shifts that actually stick, and not just, wanting to make it happen. We got to make it stick.
Yeah. Well, I do want to be cognizant of our time here because we do have an 11 o'clock after us. So I'd like at this time to open up the floor to see if anyone has